One of the problems with recruiting for investment banking is not the knowledge or skills you acquire, but the access to talk with real investment bankers to put your best foot forward. Our sponsor, WSO Academy, can provide those connections with 60 head mentors who are finance professionals at top firms like Goldman, Centerview, and JP Morgan. Imagine being able to get on the phone within 24 hours with one of the Academy's 1,300 mentors right before a critical interview. Get on the waitlist for WSO Academy today by clicking the link in the show notes or by visiting wallstreetoasis.com/academy. All right. Welcome to Investment Banking Insights. This is the only show dedicated to helping you learn both the technical and non-technical aspects of investment banking. My name is Alex Mason, and I am your host. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you're having a wonderful day and just living life to the fullest. Now, what are we talking about here on the show? We're talking about investment banking. Whether you're new to the show, whether you're a veteran listener after a couple hundred episodes, we're just breaking down bit by bit all of the little pieces of knowledge, little nuggets of information and insight that you need to know. And right now we're going through discounted cash flow concepts. So we talked about the major valuation methodologies. This one is focused on DCFs, and we're looking at some of the more advanced aspects. And specifically lately, we've been getting knee deep into these concepts of stub periods, of mid-year conventions, figuring out how those all integrate into the DCF model. And today's question relates to that. The question is this: how does the terminal value calculation change when we use the mid-year convention? How does the terminal value calculation change when we use the mid-year convention? Now, remember that calculating the sum of the present value of free cash flows over typically a 5 to 10 year period, it's only one part of completing your DCF model. It's just one part of it. The other part is calculating what's known as the terminal value, because companies don't grow at high growth rates forever. After a certain point, we have to assume that they're going to grow at a much slower rate into infinity, because theoretically the company will be successful and just grow and grow and grow. Now, because we have this terminal value aspect, we need to figure out how that interacts with this mid-year convention we've been talking about. Now, if you are unsure about how the terminal value portion of a DCF is calculated from a fundamental perspective, go back and listen to a prior episode. We've covered this in depth, but once you've done that, come back for this episode. So we talked about how the mid-year convention impacts our DCF model. Namely, it increases the overall value because it's assumed that the cash flows for the business come in to the business mid-year instead of at the end of the year, right? That's basically how the mid-year convention affects your typical DCF calculation for the first 5 to 10 years. Now, remember, let's go ahead and talk about what happens with terminal value. Remember that there's two ways to calculate terminal value. There's the multiples method and the Gordon growth method. So let's talk about how the mid-year convention affects each of these. First of all, let's look at multiples method. Recall that with the multiples method, you look at the last year of free cash flow in the period before you assume whatever your terminal growth rate is. And then you multiply whatever relevant multiple you have with that number, with that last year of free cash flow. Now, with the mid-year convention, the only difference is that you add 0.5 to the final year or final period in order to account for the fact that the cash flow comes in at the end of the year, not in the middle of the year. So imagine you have a DCF, or for the first, second, third period, you have 0.5, 1.5, 2.5. Let's say you get all the way up to 10.5. And then at that point in your model, you decide, okay, now I need to switch over to the terminal growth section of calculating cash flows. And if you use the multiples method, you want to multiply some multiple by your final year of free cash flow, where that final year isn't going to be at 10.5. It's going to be at 11 because you want to account for that final piece of cash flow coming in all the way to complete the end of the period. Because after that point, you're assuming that the multiples method is being used. So you're assuming that the multiple is applied to that full final year of cash flow. So that's what you're doing. Now contrast this with the Gordon growth method. With the Gordon growth method, it's interesting because you don't actually change anything. Why is this? Well, it's because with this method, you assume that the cash flows grow in perpetuity. So it doesn't really matter whether you account for the final year of your high growth period at, say, 10.5 or 11, because you're assuming perpetual growth. It's just going to grow forever. You're not worried about a specific multiple that you're applying at the end of a certain period. So in this case, it's not affected. So that's how you would think about how the mid-year convention impacts terminal value calculations, both from the perspective of the multiples method as well as the Gordon growth method. All right. So that's what I got for you today here on Investment Banking Insights. My name is Alex Mason and I am your host. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate all the love. Thank you for rating the show on Spotify, particularly. I know there's a few ratings on Apple Podcasts, but on Spotify, y'all have been doing amazing, giving this show 5 stars, and I just really appreciate that. So thank you for enjoying the show, and I'll see you next time. We'll talk about some more DCF related questions. Take care.